Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by Harness. My name is Cody, and we have an exciting program ahead. Before we dive into things, I have just a couple of notes I'd like to review with everyone. First of all, we are recording our session today. So if you happen to miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to watch at a later time, or of course, if you'd like to share this with your team, you will be receiving the recording via email shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you'd like to get involved with us here, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first way is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So when you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining us from today. Now, if you have specific questions, we do want you to send those into the Q&A tab on the right side of that chat section. We'll have time at the end of our program to answer questions, so be sure to send those in and we'll be sure to address them toward the end. Additionally, we will be selecting two of our most engaged attendees today to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So ways to become eligible are send in chats, send in questions, and of course, at the end of our program, we will push out a webinar survey, and we would love to hear your thoughts there. So without further ado, let's dive right into our topic. Ignoring developer experience is hurting your organization. Developer experience is critical. And joining me today is Himanshu Mishra, Product Manager at Harness. Himanshu, thank you so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. I'm going to let you bring up your slides and dive right into things.
Great to meet you all, chat. Good, Kayleen. Nice to meet you all, Europe, US, and I myself I'm from India. So very exciting. We have all three parts of the world tuning in and learning about developer experience. So I'm very excited to talk about the importance of it, my journey, and what is Harness doing to improve that. So let me share my screen and then present to you, some of the problems that we are seeing out there that our customers are facing, that developers are facing, and then what we are building to solve that as well, and how you can start on that journey today. Awesome. So thank you all for the talk. Developer experience is critical, and how ignoring it will hurt your organization. Before we begin, a little bit about me. So I'm Himanshu. I am a product manager at Harness. Harness is an end-to-end software delivery platform offering products like continuous integration, delivery, DevSecOps, feature flags, cloud cost management, and several other things that companies need in their software delivery lifecycle. Me particularly, I am responsible for our internal developer portal product, which is based on an open source project from CNCF and Spotify called Backstage. I was an engineer in the Backstage core team at Spotify. I was in Stockholm, Sweden. I was building the Backstage for the open source community. And then the project became extremely popular and widely adopted. So I'm very excited to be building a product out of the project, which got really popular. And then you can find me on GitHub and Twitter at Orko Hunter. And feel free to keep questions in the chat. Any questions are welcome, and I will address them at the end of the session. So take it easy. Enjoy this journey with me. Right. So we hear this word developer experience a lot. What does it mean? And I think it's very subjective when it comes to an organization to define what does developer experience mean for them. But here's a formula, if you will, on measuring if you've got your DevX right. So number one is developer productivity, right? And we can try to define it as, let's say, if a developer wants to write an API integration, let's say there's a backend developer who has to pull some data from a database and then expose it as an API. And in doing that, they have to make an internal API call to one of the existing services. How fast can they achieve this? And all the things that they need to accomplish this very independent task, do they have all the tools at their disposals? Do they have the internal API spec? Do they have the right set of documentation? Do they have enough examples? Do they have the understanding that who owns this API? If something goes down, which team do I talk to internally in my organization to seek help? And similarly, in the all process, are there enough tools and the processes, are they smooth enough to ensure the developer is productive with their time? Right. And of course, the impact is a big thing. If I'm not doing things which are helping my business move fast, I'm not going to enjoy that. And lastly, in all of the process of building things and learning things, I should be satisfied with what I did, and the whole process should not feel like a nightmare. And a combination of this can be used to determine what is the level of developer experience in an organization. Extremely subjective. But when we try to achieve that in our organization, and I would also love to know if I have some individual contributors in the chat, or are you an engineering manager, are you a product manager, or are you a director of engineering looking at like what is the angle here, right? Because for everyone there is a different perspective when looking at developer experience. So if you'd like, feel free to drop like, are you an individual contributor or are you a manager? And that would help me kind of curate this content for you as well. But what's stopping us, like individual developers? What are the problems that we are facing to be the most productive? And here's a few examples that we have in front of us. Let's start with the onboarding. I joined a new company. Awesome. I cleared my interviews. I did well. Everything went well. And this is day one. I'm sitting with a brand new laptop. And what do I do? How quickly can I start becoming effective for my team? And then this is a metric which a lot of companies track is how many days does it take for them to create their 10th meaningful pull request? It could be 60 days. It could be like actually 2 months before they create this number of meaningful pull requests. In some companies, in some large organizations, this number is actually higher. There's a lot of knowledge that they have to acquire, and it takes a lot of time. So I'm new, and the best way to onboard a new developer is to have them either simulate a real kind of a working scenario, which you can do in their first week of onboarding. And in their week 2, you can give them an actual task, which will land in production in week 3, right? That would be the perfect way to test if the onboarding is right or not. And then what all things do you need in that process? And the questions are, where do I go if I need a new repository? Where do I go if I need a new project up and running? So onboarding, developer onboarding, new service onboarding are some of the bigger problems blocking us to have a good experience with a company. Now, once I'm in, the company could be extremely large. There could be 200 services internally, or there could be 2,000 services, depending on how large the company is. And where do you go to find things? There's a very interesting phrase called rumor-driven development, which is you ask people on, let's say, your Slack, your Teams, does anyone know who is the owner of this particular component? Or does anyone know who owns this API? Or do we even have this kind of API internally to do this task? So where do I go to find this source of information? Maybe it's in my existing documentation hub. Who knows who updated it and when was it last updated? So these are some of the challenges developers face. And then it could be a series of bookmarks that you do in your first, let's say, month of onboarding. I remember my bookmarks. There was like an HR bookmark with 25 links that I will have to go to. Then there was an engineering bookmark with, again, 50 different dashboards that I had to go to do one thing or the other. There were too many tools today. There are too many tools today that a company uses to do their like microservices based architecture. Typically, there's a very interesting. I can just stop sharing and show you the CNCF landscape. I'm not sure if you have seen this before, but this presents you a set of cloud native technologies that you can use today to build your organization. And then it's gigantic. All these different tools. The website is still loading for me. all these different tools for your database, for your CI, for building the images, for proxy, scheduling, orchestration, registry, and this keeps going on and on and on. And the developers have to remember at least a couple from all these categories. That's too many tools to learn if I have just joined a company and I want to be productive immediately. That's something we call cognitive overload. And then I want to create something that I personally dislike is creating Jira tickets for teams and then waiting for them on the other side of the world to wake up and then approve it. And worst, actually manually do something and then say, hey, your new pipeline is created, or your new repository is set up, or your new team is set up, or you have access to this system. And believe it or not, this is the majority of the time that gets wasted in a developer workflow in a typical company, because there's a lot of compliance pressure and a lot of things that companies have to do. And then it ultimately favors more on the compliance setup rather than the actual developers. And it's too much time, too many approvals, too many hoops to jump before I can actually start testing my idea. Let's say I'm a data engineer or a data scientist, and I have a lot of data in my application that my company is building, and I want to run test a new hypothesis, right? I was at Spotify engineer, and if you have used Spotify, there's a feature called Discover Weekly. Discover Weekly generates a weekly playlist for you. It contains a set of new songs which you would most likely like, and then will favorite and then listen more. Discover Weekly was a hack project. It was an idea of one data scientist, and then they used that to build a feature. But if it takes too much time to start new software projects, and you have to ask people and you have to get permissions and you have to get approvals, that's a big blocker on creativity and then exploring new ideas. And then you've got no help from other teams if you have chosen a tech stack which no one uses. So let's say your team uses Java for backend, but then everyone else in your team is using Golang or vice versa. Or you joined a new team, and then you from within the company, and then you find out that they decided to use Node.js for everything, and now they're stuck because there's fragmentation within the same company. So why does fragmentation happen? Why do teams choose different technologies than their fellow team members? It's because no one was there to tell them, hey, this is the golden path to production. This is the path that you should follow if you need a new software component, if you need a new backend service, if you need a new API or website. This is the path looks like. These are the 10 steps that you should follow, and then you should build that path out. The path itself, the golden path itself, it's a standard in your company. So without having those standards, developers are lost, and then they end up making decisions, resulting in fragmentation. And then it bothers new developers who join the teams. They don't find enough support from within the team. Collaboration, it's very important. When you join a new company or you're part of a company, you cannot just work on your own. You want to collaborate with others, but it's very hard to work on single features. It's very hard to collaborate if you've got fragmentation and not shared components. If everyone is using things on their own, it takes a lot of time to glue those together and then build collaborative projects. Again, I touched upon it. Self-service is very important. You cannot keep on waiting on other people to do the job you want to do. And lastly, the documentation has to be there. It has to be up to date. This is a kind of a mystery to solve. Some companies have figured it out. Some companies are still trying. In most companies, in most organizations, there's no real feedback loop. There's no real incentive to keep documentation up to date. And then if someone actually updates it, there's no feedback. Like, did it help someone? How many people are reading the documentation for my component? What is the path to updating a documentation? Is there a way to suggest an update? Is it discoverable enough? There's a lot of reasons why documentation goes out of date. and then it ultimately results in lack of knowledge, and there's a barrier that gets created. All right, so these are some of the examples. I'm sure there's plenty examples that's in your mind as well. Some of the things that you might be seeing today in your organization that is blocking, like your developers, and then they're facing issues. So if you'd like to share one such problem that you're facing in your team or in your organization, feel free to write it in chat. Let's discuss this if there's something that you face that you're facing today. Awesome. So now, let's say we are developers, we are engineers, and we all agree on some of these problems, right? Let's say our managers agree. Why would our CFO agree that it's very important for self-service to exist, right? So there's a clear there's a path to it. Like you have to connect the dots, and you have to convince your executives that this is an actual problem to solve, also from a business angle. Otherwise, it never gets prioritized. So how do we do that? How do we ensure that developer experience in solving that is very critical for the business? So let's look at some of the metrics, right? There's been a lot of surveys recently. Stack Overflow, Harness does its own survey, several LinkedIn surveys, and you'll find that almost 40% of time that developers spends is on toil, is on non-coding, unnecessary things that they would like to. I would like to read the chat as well. Just slightly on the screen. Yes, thank you, Jessica. So yeah, a lot of time being wasted on non-coding toil, right? And these are some of the examples. Developers are waiting for slow builds, and then ultimately they fail, and then you have to figure out what went wrong, whom to reach out to. You have to babysit the deployments, especially if it's critical deployment, if something will fail. If it's happening on Friday night, well, we have to babysit it, and then it ultimately ends up in disturbing developers and taking up the entire day. You have to fill a lot of checkboxes. You have to say, yep, we ensure all these rules and compliance and security, and there's no automation around it. You have to ask for help, and then there's a lot of knowledge, tribal knowledge spread in the organization. This is a word which I like. It's called flow state. And then I, as a developer, I love to be in my flow state. And flow state is when you're doing a task and then you're so absorbed in it that you forget what's around you. And then you're totally absorbed in it. And flow state is actually broken a lot of the times in the software development lifecycle. And that's what I think we should fix. So I'll give an example. Let's say I am integrating an API. I'm making an API call to one of my internal systems, and I need to know what input the API accepts. So maybe it accepts a string, maybe it accepts an array, right? I don't like. Let me quickly look up the docs for that API and then come back and then make the request, right? I've got my headphones on. I'll open my internal documentation hub. I'll search for that API. Cool. I'll hit a page. It will have a spec. Maybe it will link me to a API schema if my company's fortunate enough to publish that. Otherwise, I might be opening the code of that API, internal API, and I might be looking inside and figuring out what does it accept, right? Maybe I'll figure out which team owns it, and maybe I send them a message, and then I get a response. If all of this takes less than 2 minutes, my developer, like my flow state will be maintained. If this takes more than 2 minutes, it's gone. I immediately lost my focus. Then it will take a lot of time for me to get back in that state. So maintaining the flow state is very important. And then all the things that I mentioned, most of the time, they're not available in an organization. And if we don't do this, if developers are not spending their time on writing code, and don't get me wrong, Developers are not supposed to write code all the time. I love to collaborate. I love to brainstorm. I love to create architecture diagrams. But if I have to wait for a pipeline to finish and then tell me that it broke, that's not the time that I would like to spend. I would rather go home and spend time with family. So if you don't do this, there's a lot of impact on the quality of the software that the company is producing, the security, and the efficiency of it. So there's a great talk from Jyoti, our CEO, Jyoti Bansal, on how much money is being spent because we're not fixing this problem that developers are spending a lot of time on non-coding parts. So now we've explained what are some of the roadblocks, what are some of the implications of it on the business side. Now, let's take an example of what does good look like. And this is only one of the examples of the good in quotes. And then it also covers the concept of golden paths that I talked about earlier. So let's say a developer wants to create a new service in the company. It is an individual contributor, an application developer. The team decided they have to create a new service and then follow their sprint. There is, let's say, an internal developer portal, right? And this box that you see, it has a golden path for backend services. And the golden path is two parts. One is a set of templates. There's a template for the repository that will be created, the code base, like a hello world code, which I can immediately git clone if I do, let's say, yarn start. If it's a node service, it will give me a hello world API to run with. There are templates for my CI pipeline, which takes that code, builds it, and then creates an artifact and then puts it in my internal artifact registry. It handles everything. It handles authentication and creating a new repository and all of that. There's also a deployment pipeline, which would take that artifact and deploy it, let's say, in a new namespace of my internal dev environment. It will also provision some infrastructure if I need that for my new application. It will also instrument my monitoring dashboards, let's say in Grafana. It would install the logger and it would set up a logging project for this new component. It will also ensure that I'm not installing things that I'm not supposed to install, let's say some open source libraries which are not allowed in my company. And then it does a lot more things, which is typically where the external input is needed, right? The golden path, the pipeline actually does all of this for me. And it also gives me a tutorial. It gives me a documentation of this is what you do on step one. This is the change that you make. It takes me through a journey of how can I write a new endpoint. So the goal is from idea to actually a hello world API being created. Can we do this in 2 minutes? Can we do it in 10 minutes rather than 10 days? And that's something golden paths are supposed to do. Now, another key aspect to golden path is that there are several other personas here. So you see a platform developer who's building these, let's say, CI/CD pipeline templates. There is a backend architect group who's building what does the new backend service look like in our organization. There is a product security team who's building what are some of the like guidelines we want to put when a new repository is created. Let's say this library must be installed after this version, right? We don't want an older version because we detected there was a log4j incident that happened earlier, or something else. Let's say this. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? You want to stop fragmentation. You don't want different, let's say, database ORMs to be used to connect to, let's say, Postgres. Just bake it as part of the platform. Don't ask developers to remember what is the standard in this company. Like, we're supposed to use this library over that library. Or let's say your favorite build tool, right? Like if you're a Python developer and you don't want to use pip, you want to use something called Poetry. Or let's say you're a web developer in your company and the company uses Yarn instead of NPM. Don't bother developers with all these things to remember. Just put it in the platform, just bake it as part of the repository template, as part of the golden path. All of the new projects that will spin up will have that standard by default, and then you will ensure that everything is running on the same technology. All developers are able to engage with each other, right? And then, yeah, golden path again creates all these things which some SRE would be interested in. So now this is where I'm getting to the core of the talk, which is an internal developer platform, and golden path is a concept which is a part of it. It connects all the different personas in the engineering org, and then it tries to solve some of the problems that we talked about earlier. And this phenomena is also known as platform engineering. It has taken up a very kind of a like, it is very popular these days. I was at KubeCon in Chicago a few months ago, and then you would find every startup out of the 5 startups that you walk in front of it, like they mentioned platform engineering. They mentioned that you have to build your internal platform for developers and then treat your developers as customers. Very interesting concept. You might have heard of it before, but imagine there is a team internally in the engineering org, let's say 5 engineers, 50 engineers, depending on how large your company is. The team's responsibility is to treat the internal engineering community as their customer. The responsibility is to listen to their feedback, build some KPIs, build some metrics to measure their effectiveness. The team is often known as platform engineering team, developer effectiveness team, developer experience team. But if you don't have these fancy words, you can also use DevOps team. That's your go-to team, which is building a product for the internal customer community, which is your developer community. And this is how Gartner shows what a typical internal platform looks like. So you've got these product teams who are at the top, who are shipping features to their customers. And you've got all these internal tools for you. You've got some tools, some knowledge, some documentation, some reusable components, which are, let's say, APIs, internal libraries, and so on. Then you've got a big infrastructure platform which provisions infrastructure, which grants access to different people. And you've got all these platform teams maintaining this platform. And then the thing that you see here, this bit, is the developer portal, is something that exposes all of this internal platform, the complexity of it, to developers. So developers engage with their internal platform using the developer portal. And that is the product I'm in charge of at Harness. That is the project which is called Backstage, and I'll talk about that from now on. So this is Harness in a nutshell. We focus on continuous integration, continuous delivery. We focus on shifting left so that you enforce some of your security best practices and then run some checks and put the guardrails way before it gets deployed or it gets built. We focus on ensuring that your systems are solid, you have a good developer experience, and all of your processes are optimized so that they don't cost you too much or they're not slow enough. Like they should be fast enough. And then the project that I work upon is internal developer portal in the developer experience category. But before we talk about Harness IDP, I want to talk about Backstage. Backstage is an open source project from Spotify. It's part of CNCF now. It's an incubating project. If you've heard about Backstage, let me know. If you've heard about backstage.io, you can let me know if this is something you have already known or you're hearing about it for the first time. It has got like 25,000 stars on GitHub, and it's an open platform for building these developer portals. A developer portal, again, is something that exposes the platform that exists in the company to developers, and and this is an example of it. So a typical developer portal consists of, you can say, 3 main areas, which is what platform engineering uses the team uses to solve some of the problems that we talked about earlier. So the number one thing is we're going to keep track of everything we have. I, as a developer, I should go to a place and then clearly see all the services that my team owns, all the APIs that my team owns, and then where the documentation for it. Similarly, I should be able to do the same for all of the software components that exist in my company. So a software catalog is a registry which keeps track of everything that exists. It establishes ownership. So all of these components will be linked to a team who owns it. So you can immediately find out, hey, I needed something from my access control service. Great. This is the team who owns it. This is the product manager of the team. This is the engineering manager. Go talk to them. You'll be able to solve your problem. There's another side to it. So software catalog keeps track of everything, and I'll show you in a demo right now. But it also presents for every component a single pane of glass, a single view for all the things that you would want to see as a developer. So you don't have to go to 50 places. You don't have to have the CNCF landscape, the 100 tabs that I showed you earlier. All of the information that you need on a daily basis can be presented on a single view. So that is software catalog, 1 out of 3. Second out of 3 is automation. So catalog improves visibility in the company. Self-service workflows provide golden paths for the company. So let's say developers need golden paths for new service creation, for new website creation, and so on. Where would we present that? Where would we expose? And by we, I mean the platform engineering team, the DevOps teams, the architects. How can they expose all of that? Should there be a CLI for backend creation, and there should be a different, let's say, Jira ticket that needs to be created, and there's a ServiceNow ticket that needs to be created for, let's say, infrastructure needs, and someone else has a Slack-based request. Self-service workflows in IDP combines all of the standards into one place so that developers can self-serve themselves. They don't have to talk to anyone. They come to a place, choose what they need, enter the details that the workflow needs, go get a coffee, come back, and then the job is done for them. Everything is set up for them. And that happens using an orchestrator. And lastly, you've got all these services. Great. The new services are being built based on the standards that we have created. But for the existing one, the standards are changing, and then there's no way to keep track of it. So I, as a team owner, I, as a team lead, how do I know that I'm doing well on a service maturity scale? Am I running the right version of the languages that I'm running? Am I using the right versions of the libraries that we have? Am I using the right, like, let's say, the build base image for in my build pipelines? Do I have enough security checks running before we deploy? Are my DevOps best practices there? Do I have an on-call? And what do I need to do as a developer to follow the best practices? A lot of the times, team lead and engineering managers are supposed to open a spreadsheet and then enter some details like, hey, this is something that I do in my team. It's very manual. And then that sheet is seen by, let's say, your executives, and then that is the way to keep track of, let's say, migrations or standards. There's no automation. There's no real-time way to keep track of it. So scorecards actually allow you to keep track of those standards that you want to do and then enforce them across software development lifecycle. So this is IDP in a nutshell, these 3 main areas, and then would love to dive into demo. So the demo is going to be backstage for, let's say, 40% of the demo, and then the rest of it is going to be harness. And then, so how am I doing on time? I'm 35 minutes. Let me wrap up the demo in 10 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A. Cool. So let me share my screen. So this is Harness. So we're looking at a product called Internal Developer Portal, which is a part of the Harness platform. As you can see, we have got CI, we've got CD, we've got feature flags, and several other modules that I showed you earlier. And the platform is very modular. You can pick and choose, and you can decide what problems to solve, and then you can go from there. So let's talk about developer portal. Now, remember we had three main use cases. So I'll cover catalog, I'll cover self-service workflows, and then I'll cover scorecards. So imagine I'm a developer. I wake up in the morning, and then I need to look at all the things that I own as my team. So for example, I go to my catalog, and then I filter by, let's say, the owned tab. So if I'm part of a team, I'll be presented with the things that I own, right? So I can look at, well, there is this boutique front end that I own. It's a service. It's written in Go. Let's check it out. Catalog presents an entity view. It shows me all the basic metadata that I need to know about this component. For example, where does this live in Git? Where's the source code? Where's the documentation? What does this do? Which team owns this? Which system is this part of? Is this production, or is this an experimental project? And then what are some of the languages it's written in? Where are the different like dashboards for production, for QA, and for the dev environment that this is deployed to? How is this component doing on the best practices that we have defined for the company? So it looks like I'm doing good on service maturity, not doing so good on DevOps best practices. So let's check it out, what is going wrong there. It also shows me my entire catalog as a graph. So currently it's showing that this component, boutique frontend, depends on the ad service. It is a part of the boutique cart service, which is a bigger entity. It exports the Pet Store API and the Star Wars GraphQL API. And it's part of the platform system. And it's owned by this team. And then from here, I can quickly explore and then look at other components like the boutique ad service. Now I'm looking at this. It's owned by a different team and does different things. So let's go back to exploring boutique frontend. Now, one of the most common use cases is what happened with the latest build. I just created a PR. It must be running some tests. What happened to it? So you can quickly take an overview of the last execution of your CI provider. Looks like my last build failed, and I need to look at this and I need to look at the logs and do something about it. Now, the beauty of Backstage and the beauty of IDP is that all of the tabs that you see here, so the CI/CD tab that we're looking at is coming from Harness itself. So we're looking at execution view of one of the Harness pipelines, and we can look at what happened, what builds failed, what exactly went wrong. But you can do the same with any other CI provider, any other CD provider. Harness IDP is agnostic to whatever tools that you have, and same for Backstage. What are some of the APIs that this component exposes? And then if I'm looking at an API, what is the most important thing that I want to know? I want to know what endpoints it exports and how can I use this API. This is an internal API, if you will. I'm looking at an example. I'm looking at the inputs that it needs, and then all the different scenarios that exist. Now, you must have noticed that the tabs changed. When it's an API, I'm looking at a definition. But when I'm looking at a service, I'm looking at different set of tabs. For example, here, this has CI/CD. So again, the layout changes based on the kind of entity that we're looking at. Now, where's the documentation for this? Maybe I should go to my internal docs hub and try to figure out where the docs live? No. The documentation lives in the context of the component. So as a developer, you're looking at your internal portal, and then you find out your service that you want to learn more. And then you quickly jump over to the docs tab, and then you get to see the docs and you get to read the docs. Similarly, we have got a scorecard view as well. So for a component, we can see that the company, the platform engineering team wants to measure certain things that the service should be doing. For example, it should have good API success rate. It should be running the latest version of Java. It should have documentation, and then good test coverage, and also fewer errors in production. The security team wants to check for entirely different set of things. It wants me to have a dependabot running so that my dependencies are upgraded, a branch protection setup, I'm not leaking passwords in my code base, and so on. Great, few things need to be fixed. We'll take a look at it. The DevOps team wants me to set up on-call and have an escalation policy, and looks like it's very important for them because of the high weightage. Let's fix this as well. So this is a developer view to all of it. So we looked at a catalog, we looked at all the different parts of the catalog, and then this is what we see. Now, there was we talked about golden paths for a lot of time. So this is the second part of IDP where we can see all the different golden paths that are created for my company, for developers in my company, and then what I can do for that. For example, here, I can create a new infrastructure from here. Great. I don't have to create tickets to do this. So let me see, what do I need to do? I need to choose my team. I need to tell what application this is associated with. And then the golden path recommends the set of kind of best practices. So by default, these are some of the things that you should be going ahead with. Of course, if you want to customize things, you can do that. Once you've got all the requirements, you hit play and then go get your coffee. And then this will do all the orchestration for you. And then here we can see an example. Similarly, different kinds of workflows can be created. And then, by the way, that was the developer side. The platform engineering actually creates one such pipeline in Harness to do the orchestration. And this is one of the biggest differentiators with running Backstage on your own, is that Harness provides you our pipelines, which is where you can use to create repositories, create new pipelines, seek approvals, run Terraform, create new infrastructure, and so on. And then also it lets you create, like put guardrails in place. Like it lets you not deploy things if you don't want to, or stop developers from doing things that they're not supposed to do. So that's something that's possible using our pipelines. All right, so this is Harness workflows, and of course every workflow is a YAML behind the scenes. All the inputs are created using a YAML form, and then there's also a template editor that you can use and then build one such form. So two parts to IDP workflows. One is the UI, and then there's an orchestrator behind the scenes. This is all the developer view. Lastly, there's an admin view for a platform engineer to customize IDP, to let's say enable plugins and set up different integrations with different tools that you have internally, create scorecards from different data sources that you have in your system, different things that you want to measure, configure the layout of different pages that exist in catalog, set up some access control, create pipelines, look at the execution history, and so on. So there is an entire admin view that comes with Harness IDP. So a lot of it was Backstage, and then like a majority of it is something that exists in Harness IDP. With that, I would love for you to check out both of these projects. If you go to backstage.io, this is where you can see the open source project. And then if you go to harness.io, this is where you can check out Harness. And then in the product section, you can see internal developer portal, which is powered by Backstage. So I have 15 minutes on the clock, and I've shown you a demo. I've talked about the problems. If we have to summarize the key takeaways from this session, we can say that ignoring developer experience is costly to the business. It's not something that just developers want just for themselves. It's also very important that you measure this. So it's very important that you treat your internal developers as customers. You hear what are the problems they're facing. You measure things like build times or mean time to recover. If you've heard about Tora metrics and different other things that companies can measure to actually try to see what is happening at the grassroots level. And finally, you can start your platform engineering journey with a developer portal like this to start solving some of the problems that you're hearing from them. With that, let's try to answer some questions, and I'll share screen when I need to. Otherwise, that thank you for the session.
Awesome. Well, we have received a few questions up until this point. So if you have any more to our audience, please send them in. We've got time set aside here. So Himanshu, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and dive straight into our questions. Paul P asks, how does Harness's approach to developer experience translate to smoother, more accessible, and capable customer experience outcomes?
Right. I assume this is, let's say, when you have a better, like within an organization, if you have a better developer experience, you're saying that this has impact on the product itself for their customers. Maybe that's something I can assume, or maybe you mean Harness's approach to its own product so that Harness customers have a better experience. So let me think about the first one, and then if you have the second one as your question, feel free to add it. When we think about a great customer experience, the customer has some goals that they want to achieve, like they have their own business outcomes they want to solve. And then you, as a provider, let's say a SaaS company, you want to offer some features for them. The best customer experience in this way is that they request a feature and then you're able to deliver to them, let's say in a couple of weeks. In order to do that, the team who's responsible for building that feature needs to have all the tools at their disposal so that they can quickly iterate. They can deploy as much as they can. Like imagine if deployments happen monthly, you're not going to revert to the developer on the same week. So your deployments need to be independent. They need to be, the team should be able to iterate and build as fast as they can, and then actually see that if the developer is happy or not, if the customer is happy or not. So having a very let's say smooth process internally in a company directly impacts what is the turnaround time to a customer request. And then I believe that's one of the biggest outcomes of customer experience org in any company.
So our next question is about weighing financial approvals and oversights versus developers actually being able to get things done. What kind of criteria do you look for when making decisions between cost savings and actually getting the developer productivity up?
Right. So this is something the world is learning together for the first time. We're going through an economy where we started with all these great tools and all this great mission, and then for the past 2-3 years, every procurement team is having a tough time in getting new tools or creating new budgets. So cloud spend is a big topic in every company. The companies has been spending a lot of money, and now there's no budget to do that. So teams are actually asked to cut down on the resources they're consuming, figure out a way to make things more effective. And that's a hard reality for any developer to actually go and look at it. So what I think is the best way to solve that is actually something we do at Harness. We have a cloud cost optimization product, cloud cost management, which actually saves a lot of this, let's say, optimize auto stopping for servers if they're not being used, detecting what were some of the stale things that you have created which are not getting used, recommending developers on their pull request what is the impact of this change and how it will increase how you're doing on the budget, showing the team that this is your monthly budget and then you're exceeding it. I believe there is something that the tools like cloud cost management can do. However, we're living through tough times, and I think unless we get through this, the developers' freedom will be impacted through how much budget the funds have, right? And that's the harsh reality today. So all of us need to be much more efficient in our cloud cost management as well as our processes. Like the team needs to justify like their headcounts, and then the demand from their customers, and why they need X number of engineers and how directly they're contributing to the business. That's something which I feel is a big topic, and a very controversial topic today. So um, yeah, that's where I'll end there.
So Christine B in our audience asks a very pointed question here. So are you advocating for internal customer personas to support workflows for DevOps teams?
Advocating internal customer personas to support workflows for DevOps teams. Um, the workflows are created for developers to solve their platform engineering needs and cater to that in a self-service manner. So yes, it definitely includes DevOps teams. So if DevOps teams, so what we have seen with our customers is that if you have a company of, let's say, 1,000 engineers, and if you have a DevOps team of, let's say, 3 engineer or 4 engineer, on a monthly basis, you might be getting on an average around 600 to 800 tickets. This is just an average. Some companies receive a lot more requests, some companies receive a lot less. That's the reality of harness today, when we did that analysis. So imagine it takes like 10 minutes to solve that ticket, or 15 minutes, depending on what kind of tickets are they. You can immediately calculate the cost of the manual work that the team has to do. Imagine all of this is provided on a self-service hub like IDP. The DevOps team becomes more free to set up other kinds of automations and not bother with individual requests from developers. Second thing is, by automating all of this, you're putting in the best practices in the platform itself. Like the security team gets to say that whenever new pipelines are being created, ensure that we have the vulnerability scanner in place. Otherwise, every time if someone is creating it manually, they might forget, and then you might end up with like these kind of incidents. So automation of all the like DevOps practices which are exposed to developers, yeah, definitely that's something we should all do when we're setting up an IDP.
Wonderful, thank you. We've received a couple of questions pertaining to small startups and limited budgets. So let me kind of group these together a little bit. Um, so whenever you are talking about the golden path that presumes multiple groups to create those necessary aspects, how do you pull off this golden path in a small startup?
Yeah, you cannot. So if anyway, when you're a small startup, let's say, so the tipping point for Backstage or tools like IDP is 150 developers. That's when you'll start to see the problems of, like, that's a Dunbar's number, right? You don't remember everyone in the company. You don't know who they are. What do they do? So our recommendation from the Backstage team, or let's say from Harness, is that if you're smaller than that, don't worry about standards too much. Like right now, you should worry too much. You should worry on speed, and then moving fast, and then building products, and then scaling your organization. Once you've got enough team, like large number of like multiple teams and fragmentation and silos within teams, that's when a tool like IDP can come, and that's when you can have, let's say, your first developer effectiveness engineer, right? Like someone who wakes up in the morning and thinks about the problems of the internal community. If you're a group of, let's say, just 30 engineers, you all know each other, and then you can talk about problems, and you can come up with solutions. But if you've got a larger audience, there's a diverse set of problems which need to be solved in a very organized manner. So our recommendation is, these are not the tools. If you're a 5-person team, Kubernetes is not your, you should not be deploying on Kubernetes, right? You might have heard this earlier, that shouldn't be a go-to tool to deploy one service. Similarly, tools like Backstage are not meant to be deployed for a smaller team.
All right, Himanshu, thank you so much for that. We are coming up on time, so we do have time for one more question. And so I want to make sure we hit on AI before we leave. So, from the developer experience perspective, what impacts does Harness's AI development assistant have on workflows and outcomes?
Definitely. So check out our website. It has a lot of examples on how AI fits in the entire software delivery lifecycle. So it's not so writing code is the hottest topic, but once you have written code, there's a lot of things that goes into taking that feature and then having a customer try it, and then things don't break. That's where you build the code, you test the code, you deploy it on a staging environment, you provision infrastructure, you roll it out, you look for let's say errors in production, maybe you do rollback, you fix something else, and then there's a lot of there's a life cycle, entire life cycle of things that you do. Now AI for writing code is, you're all aware, it's going, there's Copilot, there's other things being built. Where Harness focuses on right now is the things that happens after you write code. Of course, writing code is definitely part of it, but no one is doing AI in the things that happens after you've written code. Let's say there's some vulnerability in your code, right? um, Instead of being notified on a daily basis, Mr. Developer, fix this, fix this, fix this. How about there is a PR that you have to approve and merge? That's it, and that will fix your vulnerability. If the set of let's say you are using an outdated endpoint from an internal API, and then there is a newer endpoint, and the previous one is deprecated because it has some vulnerability or something else. What if there is a PR on your code base which actually does that upgrade and then fixes it for you? So my personal take on this is AI will actually enable developers to not be bothered too much with things that they have to do, because those things are very repeatable and can be created in a pattern and can be applied across the software ecosystem that they have. So AI will free up a lot more time from developers' hands so that we can focus more on writing code and designing what code needs to be written, which is the biggest problem still, I believe. So AI will not take our jobs. I don't think that will happen as a software developer, but it will definitely free up a lot of our times to think about things to build, and it will be a great assistant. So our AI is actually called AI Developer Assistant, ADA, and yeah, that's our philosophy, and there'll be a lot more coming. Everyone is learning, but we just have customers and real problems to solve. So we're very excited about bringing AI in all parts of delivery lifecycle. So I know we
Awesome.
are at the end of time. I write about these things a lot. I actually have a newsletter on LinkedIn called Your Platform Engineering 101, where I write about how is AI impacting. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn and connect more and ask questions, and would love to continue the conversation. But with that, hand it over to Cody.
Awesome. Himanshu, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we didn't totally plan to fill the full hour, but of course we did because it was great stuff. So thank you so much for your time and for joining us today on Techstrong Learning.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Cody.
Of course. So before I release our audience, just a couple more things. We will be sending out the recording of today's session via email, and you'll be receiving that as soon as it becomes available. So expect that here in the next 30 minutes or so. You can also find it living on the DevOps website. That's devops.com/webinars, and it will be in the on-demand section. I will be contacting two of our most engaged attendees today to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you for your chats, for your questions, and it's not too late. There is a survey pinned to the top of the chat. If you'd like to let us know your feedback there, we would love to hear from you, and that will also qualify you for our giveaway. I'd like to thank Harness for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone here, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you giving us an hour, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect, everyone.